Penny drops by me. Sam looked around at the travelers milling about the McCarran airport, killing time until they were able to fly away from the city in the desert that never slept. He could hear in the distance the sound of last-minute gamblers sitting at slot machines until their flights were called, as if anyone ever won big at an airport. "Sorry about that," the bartender said, approaching Sam once more. He shook his head at him, waving the apology off. "I just wanted to ask you a few more questions." "Shoot," he replied, taking a rag from behind the bar and wiping it down. "Mr. and Mrs. Paz were regulars here." "They came in every once in a while when they got back from a trip," he replied. "That they'd taken on their newly acquired luxury jet?" Sam confirmed. The bartender nodded. "Was there anything strange about them, besides that they'd recently come into millions?" "That's not so strange. Not around here," he smiled. "Doesn't always happen, but sometimes people strike gold. House doesn't always win. They were a normal couple, if that's what you mean. It was just engine failure, from what I heard." "All right. Thank you for your time," Sam sighed. The bartender headed away towards a group that had just come in, and Sam pulled out his phone, scrolling through to find his brother's number. He let his thumb hover over the call button before locking the screen again. He didn't want to tell Dean the news, that there was no news. For whatever reason, Dean had been hell-bent on finding a case here, and Sam knew it wouldn't be easy to convince him there was none. He looked at his watch, a little after 7. Sam had spent the morning enjoying his reprieve from the city and the road, watching the sun come up from the Nevada wilderness, but he had to admit it felt good to be back in the air conditioning now, and the shower he'd taken back in the empty hotel room had been nothing less than heaven. He was about to raise his hand to catch the bartender's eye again, maybe order a drink before finding his brother, when a voice from down the line of stools caught his attention. "I'm not freaking out, okay? I know you think you know me so well, but I'm fine." A woman sat several seats down from Sam with her cell to her ear, her other hand clutching tightly to the bottle of water in front of her. "No, my family always loved him, even when they found out what he did, so it's not all that surprising that he's coming to the wedding," she sighed, and paused as the person on the other line talked. Sam couldn't help but watch out of the corner of his eye, noting the way she scratched at the label on her bottle with the nail of her thumb. "I'm not mad at you," she laughed. "Enjoy your extra night here with Bridezilla." Sam stood and walked down the line, slowly, taking a seat a little closer. She didn't look up, didn't even seem to notice him as she continued her conversation. "I'm not telling you what happened last night," she smiled into her phone. "But you were right, I'll give you that. I had fun." She paused once more. "Okay, call me when you get home. Bye." Sam watched in mild surprise as the smile she'd been holding during their conversation slipped away, released as if it were something heavy she could finally drop. She put her phone on the bar in front of her, and the bartender walked to her. "Can I get a whiskey neat, please?" she asked. "Make that 2, Sam said before the bartender turned away. She glanced to him and gave him a half smile from the corner of her mouth before turning forward again. "Rough trip?" Sam asked, and she nodded, taking a deep breath through her nose. "I think it's safe to say Vegas did a number on me," she laughed. "Did you lose big or something?" "Something like that," she said, smiling down at her hands. "What about you?" "Nah, I'm just working." "Rough job, working at a bar in Vegas." "It's got its perks," Sam smiled at her, noticing the blush rise to her cheeks. He scooted down to sit right beside her, and they waited until the bartender brought their drinks. "What should we toast to?" "To doing Vegas up right," she grinned, and tapped her glass to his. "I'm Brittany." "Sam." Sam shared another drink with Brittany as the patrons came and went, taking off to catch their flights. She was telling him about her cousin's upcoming nuptials when her phone vibrated in front of her, lighting up. "Sorry," she said, picking it up and sliding the screen unlocked. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." "Something wrong?" Sam asked before taking a sip of his drink. She shook her head and put her phone back down. "Flight's been delayed. 2nd time today," she sighed. "Delayed until when?" he asked, checking his watch. It was almost 9 now. "Tomorrow, at 1. She stood from her stool, looking to her purse to pull out some cash. "Thanks for hanging out with me, but I better go try and see if I can book a room for the night somewhere." Sam reached out, putting his hand over hers, and stopped her. He pulled out his own wallet and left some cash on the bar for both their drinks. "I don't mean this to sound forward or—" He trailed off, giving her a smile, and she laughed a bit at his fumbling. "Just, do you want to come back to my room? You can use the phone book or book a room there if you want. It doesn't smell like airport," he shrugged. She paused a moment, considering him. "I really don't mean it like a creep," he assured her with another smile. "No," she laughed. "I didn't think you did. I actually feel kind of like I've met you before, or I don't know. There's something familiar about you, she mused. Sam watched as she shouldered her purse and pulled up the handle on her rolling bag beside her seat before turning to him. Somewhere that doesn't smell like airport sounds great, she said, and followed him back out into the night as planes took off overhead. They shared a cab together, away from the airport, the short distance back to his motel off the strip. Brittany glanced at the sign, flickering its neon light over the parking lot, and let out a small laugh. Bet that brings in the tourists, she smiled, pointing to the sign that let patrons know the place offered color TV. Oh yeah, Sam grinned. Plus we have basic cable. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by all the luxuries. He led her to his room, letting them in and turning the lights on. Sam kicked off his shoes and got both of them a beer from the mini fridge next to the TV as she rifled through the yellow pages, calling place after place on the strip. Finally, she sighed and dropped her phone on the bed where she sat cross-legged. No luck? He asked before taking a pull of his beer. Summer in Vegas, she shrugged. I know the airport has a place, I'll just head back there. But she didn't move, tugging at the edge of the comforter instead. Sam smiled, not wanting to say anything, not wanting to scare her off. So, he started after a moment of silence, that wedding of your cousin's, is it going to be a pretty big affair? Huge, she said, looking up to him where he sat on the other bed across from her. And even better, I just found out my ex was invited. Sam let out a low whistle, raising his eyebrows at her. Yeah, she smiled. Like I said, Vegas has been kicking my ass. Is he bringing a date? Oh, God, she groaned, bringing her hand to her face. I hadn't thought of that. Probably. I don't want to get back together with him. I really don't. I just feel like he moved on so easy before we even split up, really. Sometimes I feel like I just need to do the same thing. Get on with it, whether I think I'm ready to or not, you know? Sam stood and moved over to sit beside her on the bed. You've been in Vegas all weekend with the bachelorette party, he smiled gently. I'd think you would have had a lot of opportunities for it. Yeah, I did have one. She looked down at her hands, some secret smile playing at her lips. But then I was leaving, and I guess it just didn't feel right to do that. His loss, Sam murmured, eliciting a smile from her. She looked up into his eyes, the greens and gold mixing together, and she felt the buzz from her drinks radiating outward into her limbs, her hands, her skin. Didn't we toast to doing Vegas upright? I think we did, she murmured, and leaned forward, meeting Sam halfway until her lips were on his. Sam was eager and his lips hard upon her own as she slid her hands over his shoulders and down his back. She pushed thoughts of champagne and bubbles from her mind as he shrugged out of his suit jacket and moved them so they were lying on the bed. He hovered over her, bringing his hands to the hem of her shirt and pulling it quickly over her head, throwing it to the side. She was breathless beneath him, closing her eyes so tightly, trying to get used to this new body above her, a stranger. Yet that familiar feeling again gnawing at her subtly in the corners of her mind where she couldn't place the reason. She unbuttoned his shirt and helped him out of it before they moved underneath the covers, removing clothes and sharing hurried kisses in between until it was just the two of them under the sheets. They moved together in the darkness, and she clutched at him, squeezing her eyes tightly shut as the heat pooled within her. They reached their release at nearly the same time, and she came down from it, breathing hard, running a hand over her face as he rolled away to lie next to her. They fell into a doze afterward, not speaking much beforehand, lying so that their sides were touching, her hand on his chest but not so close that they were tangled with one another. She woke fully a bit later and tiptoed to the bathroom, turning the light on once the door was shut and looked at her naked self in the mirror. She brought her hands to her cheeks and ran them down her body, inspecting herself as if she were someone new. The stranger seemed to be in the mirror now, and she watched as tears rose to her eyes, streaking down her cheeks. She was still crying when she went back to bed, and though she tried to remain silent, Sam woke to the sound and turned to her in the dark, placing his hand on her back. Hey, he whispered. Are you okay? What's wrong? I don't know, she said, shaking her head. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, he replied softly, and started to rub soothing circles on her back. Maybe I wasn't ready, she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. I don't do this kind of thing. I don't do one-night stands. It's okay, it doesn't make you a bad person. You know that, right? She remained silent, trying to let his touch soothe her, and wondered what fates had brought her here to this insane city and not let her go. How about this? How about we get breakfast in the morning? We can talk, get to know each other a little better. Doesn't count as a one-night stand then, he said. She laughed despite herself and wiped a tear away. That sounds nice. "You're sweet," she smiled, and turned towards him. He pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head on his chest, trying to find the right fit there before falling asleep. She woke to Sam's voice rumbling beneath her ear a few hours later, and a bright light permeating through her eyelids. She climbed out of her dream, blinking a few times in a daze before turning towards the source. She saw, instead, a figure in the doorway, looking as though he'd been sucker-punched in the stomach, and wondered if she had really gotten out of her dream. She blinked once, twice at him, feeling her own stomach twist terribly. Dean?